A billionaire thought it would be funny to invite the janitor to a high society gala. But when the black woman showed up, not in uniform, but in elegance and power, the entire room froze. No one was ready for what happened next. Towering glass buildings stood like a monument to wealth and ego, piercing the skyline with cold elegance. Inside, marble floors echoed under expensive shoes, and the scent of imported cologne lingered in the air long after meetings ended. The company belonged to a billionaire, whose name carried weight in the business world, a man known not only for his money, but for his love of spectacle. He thrived on being watched, admired, feared. He didn't just want power. He wanted everyone to know he had it, and he liked to prove it, often in the most callous ways. Every morning, before the executives arrived in sleek cars and designer suits, a black woman entered through the back door. She wore a plain uniform, carried her cleaning cart with quiet hands, and moved like someone who had long accepted being invisible. She never complained, never paused, never interfered. Her timing was perfect, always just before the officers woke up, and always gone before anyone really noticed she had been there. Some assumed she didn't speak much, others didn't think about her at all. To them, she was part of the furniture, functional, silent, forgettable. But she noticed everything. She saw the tension in late-night meetings. She heard whispers in empty conference rooms. She cleaned up the crumbs from catered lunches that never included her. Her presence was quiet, but her eyes were sharp. Beneath the uniform was someone who had lived, lost, and learned in ways no one in that building could have imagined. She didn't need to be seen to understand exactly how the world in that tower worked. So she worked, watched, and kept to herself. The billionaire, meanwhile, was preparing for his favorite event of the year, his private annual gala. It was a gathering of elite investors, foreign dignitaries, celebrities, and business moguls. The dress code was strict, the invitations gold embossed, and the guest list more exclusive than any VIP lounge in the country. It was less a party and more a statement. Only the best could enter, and only he decided who the best were. On the 47th floor, surrounded by laughter and whiskey glasses, he entertained a group of old money allies with his usual flair. They chuckled at his stories, nodded at his every opinion, and grinned when he poked fun at the little people working under him. That's when an idea struck him sharp and cruel, like most of his humor. "What if," he said, smirking, "we invited someone from the bottom this year? Someone really out of place, you know, for fun." The group leaned in, amused. "Like who?" one asked, raising an eyebrow. He turned toward the large glass window overlooking the lobby far below. "The janitor," he said. "That black woman. What's her name? Doesn't matter. I'll send her an invite. See if she dares to show up." Laughter erupted around him. The very idea of a janitor at a gala was absurd to them. The billionaire didn't wait. With a dramatic wave of his hand, he ordered his assistant to print an official invitation, same gold trim, same velvet envelope. He waited until just before lunch. When the offices were at their busiest, the black woman was quietly mopping near the executive lounge when the billionaire stepped out, flanked by security and assistants. Conversations paused, phones lowered, eyes turned. He walked up to her slowly, holding out the envelope as if offering a magic ticket. "You're officially invited," he said loudly, making sure the entire floor could hear, "to the gala this Friday night. Wear something memorable." The silence was thick. Then came the awkward laughs, some stifled giggles behind hands. Others watched with wide eyes, waiting to see her reaction. She paused, mop in hand. Then she looked up at him, not down, not sideways, straight into his eyes. No fear, no confusion. Her face was unreadable, but her gaze carried something still and steady, like deep water. She reached out, took the envelope with her gloved hand, and gave a single nod. She didn't say a word. No thank you, no questions, just a nod. He chuckled. "Well then," he said, spinning on his heel. "Let's see what she shows up in. Maybe a mop bucket on wheels." Laughter followed him back into the lounge. The woman quietly returned to her work, slipping the invitation into her pocket like it was nothing more than a folded note. But from that moment, the whispers began. "She's not really going, is she? She'll probably show up in her work shoes. What if she doesn't have anything to wear? She'll embarrass herself." They all assumed the same thing. The joke had landed, and the punchline would come Friday night. No one expected anything more from her. They didn't even consider that maybe, just maybe, she was letting them believe exactly what they wanted. By the end of the day, the story had traveled across every department. Emails were forwarded, jokes were made, a few pitied her, most dismissed her, but no one took her seriously. The idea that a janitor might walk into that room and hold her own was laughable to them. That's how far removed they were from understanding her. That's how sure they were of their own superiority. But in her silence, in her stillness, she was already thinking, not about what to wear, not about who would laugh, but about what that moment could become. Not for revenge, not for attention, but for something deeper, something earned. While they laughed behind glass doors, she returned to the supply closet, took off her gloves, washed her hands, and looked at herself in the cracked mirror. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She just stared long and calm, like someone remembering who they really are. And then she began to prepare. The sun had set by the time she left the building. The city bathed in a soft glow of tired streetlights and flickering neon signs. She walked the familiar path home, not quickly, not slowly, just steady. Like her thoughts, the golden envelope was still tucked neatly into the side pocket of her bag, untouched since the moment it had been given. She didn't need to reread it. She had memorized every word in a single glance. She wasn't carrying a joke in her bag. She was carrying an opportunity wrapped in arrogance. And she understood the difference. Her apartment sat in a quiet part of the city, far from glass towers and velvet carpets. The building was old but clean, the paint chipped but cared for. Inside, everything had its place. The furniture was simple, lived in. Books lined the shelves not for decoration, but for study. Notebooks rested on the small kitchen table, filled with notes, clippings, and observations. A calendar marked with quiet ambitions, This was not a space for display. It was a space for rebuilding. She moved through her home with calm familiarity, removing her shoes, washing her hands, placing her keys in the same worn dish. Then she sat at the table, lit a small lamp, and opened the invitation. Her eyes traced the edges, not with wonder, but with calculation. She wasn't surprised by the elegance. She knew how these worlds worked. Once, a long time ago, she had belonged to one of them, on the bookshelf, behind a row of dusty novels. She pulled out a slim leather portfolio. Inside were pieces of a different life, degrees, certificates, an old corporate badge with her name printed beneath the title Director. She stared at it for a moment. The ghost of who she once was looking back at her. That version of herself had worn heels every day, spoken in boardrooms, negotiated deals. But life had a way of folding sharply without warning. A betrayal, a financial collapse, a family illness. It didn't matter which came first. They all landed on her like dominoes, and she had fallen hard. But she never stayed down. That was the part no one in the office knew. They saw a janitor, not the woman who had risen before. They didn't understand the discipline it took to start over without bitterness. She had learned to live quietly, but not blindly. Every mop pushed, every floor swept, was done with awareness. She had watched the billionaire's empire from beneath its feet, understanding more than they realized. They had invited her into their world thinking she would trip over herself in aught instead. She would walk in with purpose. The next day, after her shift ended, she boarded a bus that rolled through older parts of the city streets, where stories weren't, covered in gloss. She stepped off at a corner boutique nestled between a bakery and a record shop. The window display held gowns that looked too delicate for the street they sat on, mannequins dressed in confidence. She pushed open the door, and a bell jingled overhead. From the back, a voice called out, "We're closing soon unless you're here for something real." She smiled faintly. The woman who stepped out wore thick glasses and a scarf tied with flair, her sharp eyes squinting until recognition lit them. "You," the boutique owner said, approaching with a mixture of surprise and joy. "It's been years." They embraced, not with dramatic emotion, but with the warmth of shared history. They had known each other from another life back when suits were part of her identity, not strangers to her skin. "What brings you here?" her friend asked, pulling out a chair. "You need something." The black woman reached into her bag and placed the invitation on the table. The boutique owner stared at it, read it once, then twice, her eyes growing wide. "This is real." A nod. "You're going." Another nod. A silence followed, filled with questions unasked. Then the boutique owner stood up with a quiet fire in her expression. "All right," she said. "Let's get to work." They began with measurements, not just numbers, but posture, frame, energy. The boutique owner pulled out fabric samples, asking no questions about how or why. She didn't need to know. She trusted the resolve in the woman's eyes. The gown they chose wasn't loud. It didn't glitter like stars or scream for attention. It whispered power. It curved with intention, flowed with grace. and sat on her shoulders like it had waited its whole life to be worn. Next came the walk. In front of a full-length mirror, she stood still at first, staring at her reflection not to admire it, but to understand it. Her friend circled her like an artist fine-tuning a sculpture. Shoulders back, chin high, no hesitation in her step. Every movement rehearsed in silence. Confidence didn't require sound. They worked late into the evening. Between fittings, she sat with a notepad, listing names from the guest list she had memorized. She mapped out the venue on a sketchpad, noting where the cameras would be, which side the main entrance faced, how long it would take to cross the ballroom. She wasn't walking into a party. She was stepping onto a stage one built to exclude her, and one she intended to own. She didn't speak much during the preparations. Her friend respected that. But now and then, between adjustments and notes, she would offer a look, a flicker of something deeper. Determination, not revenge. Dignity, not defiance. She wasn't angry. She had moved past that long ago. What she felt now was precision. At home, she continued her preparations. She studied online videos of past gala speeches. She read the profiles of guests, the press releases, even the past scandals swept quietly under gold-trimmed rugs. She knew the billionaire's routines, his favorite drink, the way he laughed when he thought he was being clever. She wasn't planning to speak, but if the moment came, she would not waste it. She practiced small expressions in the mirror, not smiles, but pauses. The look that made people lean in, the silence that made rooms listen. Power wasn't loud. It was composed. She had learned that the hard way. The night before the gala, she laid everything out. The gown, the shoes, the accessories. Her hair had been done hours earlier, simple, elegant, natural. She looked in the mirror one last time, no longer seeing the janitor or even the executive she once was. What looked back at her was something new, not reborn, not rebuilt, just real. She didn't need to belong to their world. She needed only to remind them that she never stopped belonging to herself. When she turned off the light and lay down to sleep, there was no excitement in her chest, no nerves, just stillness. The kind of stillness that comes before a storm, not wild, but inevitable. She didn't need a plan to impress anyone. She only needed to walk through those doors and make them remember. The night fell with a velvet quietness, blanketing the city in anticipation. Outside the towering event venue, a red carpet stretched like a royal path beneath spotlights that carved the darkness into theater. The gala had arrived the one night the city's elite measured their worth by how close they stood to the billionaire. Cameras lined the entrance, lenses poised like sentinels waiting to capture the shimmer of wealth. Luxury cars glided up to the curb in slow procession, each one a statement of status. Men in tuxedos stepped out with silver cufflinks catching the light. Women flowed from back seats in gowns that whispered six-digit price tags, and behind it all, the air buzzed with champagne laughter and the faint sound of jazz spilling from the grand doors of the ballroom. The billionaire arrived early, naturally. He didn't just host events, he orchestrated them like symphonies. always placing himself at the center of every crescendo. He stepped out of his custom vehicle with the confidence of someone who believed the world spun at his gesture. Flashbulbs erupted. He posed briefly, adjusted his cufflinks, and offered his best smile, not warm, but practiced. He was surrounded by admirers and flatterers within seconds, offering compliments wrapped in insincerity. But that was how the game was played. He laughed louder than necessary, drink already in hand, recounting the story of the janitor he had jokingly invited. "I actually sent her a real invitation," he said, shaking his head with exaggerated disbelief. "Gold trim and everything. You should have seen the look on her face. I half expect her to walk in with a mop." Laughter followed, though a few guests exchanged glances. Something about the joke felt too sharp tonight, like it might cut the wrong way. Inside the ballroom, chandeliers dripped with crystal, and the floors gleamed like mirrors. Waiters floated with silver trays, offering delicacies that most couldn't pronounce. The billionaire moved through the crowd like a king inspecting his court, pausing only to be praised. Every corner of the room had been curated to impress. And yet, there was a tension under the surface, something unspoken, like a held breath. Then it happened. Outside, the usual flow of luxury cars suddenly paused. The security detail, rehearsed and professional, stiffened. One of the guards leaned into his earpiece, confusion flickering across his face. A car unlike the others pulled up, not flashy, but elegant, understated, intentional. It didn't announce wealth with noise. It whispered it with presence. The driver stepped out first, circled around, and opened the back door. She stepped out slowly, not just dressed for the event but transformed. The black woman, who had once walked those hallways in silence, now stood in front of the world in a gown that fit like it was sewn from dignity itself. Deep midnight fabric clung to her frame with grace, a subtle shimmer catching the light as she moved. Her hair was styled to frame her face, strong and composed, her chin lifted not out of defiance, but from instinct. She walked with no hesitation, no apology, each step deliberate, like a drumbeat of intent. The effect was immediate. The crowd at the entrance fell silent. The noise died in waves, first the photographers, then the greeters, then the guests who stood closest to the door. Cameras swiveled, clicking urgently, but uncertainly, as if unsure whether they were capturing a guest or a moment that shouldn't exist. Inside, the murmur reached the ballroom in fragments. "There's someone. Who is that? Did you see her?" The billionaire turned toward the entrance, still smiling, drink half-raised. Then he froze. She entered the room. It was not a grand announcement. She didn't pose. She didn't wave. She didn't need to. Her arrival was an atmosphere shift, quiet but absolute. Heads turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. She walked the length of the red carpet with such measured control that the floor itself seemed to support her with reverence. She wasn't playing their game. She was changing it. The billionaire, for the first time that night, couldn't speak. His laughter died in his throat as he watched the woman he had tried to make a joke out of command. The very space he thought belonged only to him. His eyes narrowed. as if trying to convince himself he was imagining it. But she was real, and she was here, and every guest in that ballroom now saw her. Some whispered, "Who is she? Is she famous? She looks like royalty." Others stood in stunned silence, not daring to guess. She moved through the crowd without flinching. Every gaze that met hers was held for a moment, not aggressively, not with arrogance, but with steady acknowledgement. She wasn't there to blend in. She wasn't there to prove a point. She was there because she had every right to be. Waiters parted for her. Guests stepped aside without realizing why. Photographers kept their lenses on her even as others called their names. She had turned the gala on its head simply by existing within it. The billionaire finally set his glass down, hand trembling. Slightly, his face tightened into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He adjusted his jacket and moved toward her, trying to reclaim the room with his stride. But with each step he took, he realized that no one was watching him anymore. They were watching her. She paused near the center of the ballroom, not under the chandeliers, not near the press table, just at a place where the room could fully see her, where the billionaire would be forced to pass her on his way to the stage. It wasn't a blockade. It was a presence, quiet, immovable. He approached, trying to summon charm, but found no words that didn't sound hollow. She looked at him with the same expression she had worn when he gave her the invitation, calm, unwavering. No anger, no smugness, just stillness, and in that stillness, he saw something he hadn't expected. She was not surprised to be here. She had never doubted it. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could say anything, someone nearby asked, "Excuse me, can we get a photo with you?" Not with him, with her. More voices joined in. One guest offered a drink. Another asked her name. The billionaire stood there, invisible in his own ballroom, watching the power slip from his carefully curated grip. She smiled politely to the guests, nodding once, accepting their presence without absorbing it. She was not there to perform. She was there to be seen, and she was. Not as a janitor, not as a curiosity, but as a woman who belonged in every room they thought she never would. She didn't need an introduction. She was the moment. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere had changed. The chandeliers still sparkled, the jazz band still played, but everything now moved around her. She didn't walk with haste or hesitation. She glided through the room like it belonged to her, her eyes calm, her shoulders steady, her every step a lesson in poise. Conversations hushed when she passed. Guests leaned in, curious, magnetized by her presence without understanding why. The socialites, who once measured status by designer labels and diamond counts, found themselves suddenly unsure of their place in the hierarchy. She had rewritten the room's energy simply by walking into it. The billionaire trailed her at a distance, trying to appear unfazed. He chuckled too loudly at remarks that didn't deserve it, adjusted his jacket unnecessarily, sipped his drink faster than before. He moved like a man trying to pretend he hadn't lost control. But it was obvious the room was no longer orbiting him. The laughter had stopped. The smugness now looked brittle. His gaze kept darting toward her, hoping for a moment that would turn things back in his favor. but none came. Near the edge of the ballroom, a reporter from a national outlet spotted her. The journalist had been sent to cover the event's elite, the fashion, the usual quotes from the usual faces. But when she saw the crowd gravitating toward the unfamiliar woman, she sensed a story. She stepped forward, notebook in hand, with professional curiosity lighting her face. "Excuse me," she said gently, tapping the woman's arm. "Are you someone I should know?" The black woman turned to her, face serene. "That depends," she said with a smile, "on what you think is worth knowing." The reporter paused, intrigued. "Your presence tonight has caught everyone's attention. May I ask your name?" She offered it simply, without embellishment. Then came the second question, the one the reporter hadn't planned to ask but couldn't stop herself. "You carry yourself like someone with experience politics? Business? Are you a guest speaker?" A few heads turned to listen. The woman didn't flinch. "No, I'm not speaking tonight," she replied evenly. "But I suppose being heard doesn't always require a microphone." The reporter blinked, stunned by the grace in her tone. She scribbled the quote quickly. As others heard her speak articulate, thoughtful, composed, the curiosity deepened. She didn't use complicated words or flaunt intellect. She simply responded with a kind of quiet authority that demanded attention. Soon, executives who normally hovered only near the billionaire's table began drifting toward her. A CFO offered her a glass of wine. A fashion magnate commented on her gown. A politician's spouse asked her what she did. She took the glass gently, sipped it, and answered with just enough mystery to hold their attention without feeding it. "What I do," she said, "changes depending on who's watching." They laughed softly, not mockingly, but admiringly. It was the kind of answer that made people want to know more. That's when the billionaire could no longer resist. He approached from behind, his smile tight, forced. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, raising his voice slightly, "let me introduce you to the surprise of the evening. You'll never guess this radiant guest of ours is actually our janitor." He laughed as if sharing an inside joke, expecting the others to join him. But the reaction wasn't what he expected. The guests didn't laugh. They turned to her and then to him. Their expressions were uncertain, some embarrassed, others disappointed. The tension was tangible. Thin as glass, his words hung in the air, like smoke, awkward and unwanted. For a few seconds, no one said anything. Then she smiled, not hurt, not angry, just poised. "Yes," she said softly, "I clean your floors. I wipe the fingerprints off your glass walls, vacuum the pieces of your meetings when they're over. I see everything you leave behind when you think no one's watching." The room stilled. She continued, voice gentle but precise, "And I come from a world where work is not measured by luxury but by necessity, where dignity isn't worn but earned. I walk your halls silently, not because I lack a voice, but because I learned that power doesn't always speak, it observes." A pause. "And tonight," she added, "I accepted an invitation that was never meant to be kind. I accepted it anyway, not to prove anything, but to remind myself that I can walk into any room I choose and still be myself. For a beat, the entire ballroom stood frozen. Then came the sound, slow, deliberate applause from someone in the back. A woman in a silver gown. Then another, and another. The clapping grew, rippling across the floor like a tide. It wasn't thunderous. It was respectful, sincere. She stood there, unmoving, receiving it not with arrogance, but with grace. The billionaire's face flushed. His laugh died completely. His eyes darted around, searching for some form of recovery. But it was too late. The moment he thought would humiliate her had only exposed himself. His joke had turned inside out. The crowd wasn't laughing at her. They were reassessing him. He tried to chuckle again, to mask his shrinking presence. But no one joined in. Instead, the guests began turning back to her, re-engaging, leaning in. One asked if she'd ever consider consulting. Another asked if she wrote. Someone whispered to a friend she should be running this place. The billionaire, now sidelined in his own gala, found himself alone in a growing crowd. Even the waitstaff, once invisible like she had been, exchanged glances of quiet satisfaction. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She simply nodded once more to the billionaire, the same way she had when he handed her the invitation days ago, calm, collected, unreadable. Then she turned back to the guests and resumed her evening, as if the interruption had never occurred. But everyone knew it had, and no one would forget. The music dimmed, and the room grew quiet as the evenings. MC took the stage, tapping the microphone gently. "Tonight," he announced with a polished grin, "we've had the pleasure of being reminded that the most memorable guests are often the ones we least expect. And in that spirit, someone very special has been invited to share a few words briefly." He motioned toward her. That same woman who had entered the night not with noise, but with purpose. All eyes turned. The room, already wrapped in her presence, seemed to hold its breath. She walked to the stage without hesitation, her gown trailing like smoke, posture unbroken. The spotlight hit her not with force, but with recognition. It simply followed. Where the attention already was, she took the mic in both hands and stood still for a moment, surveying the sea of faces, powerful men and women who ruled industries, shaped narratives, signed checks with names that echoed in headlines. And yet, now, they waited for her. She didn't clear her throat. She didn't fumble. She spoke like she had been waiting her whole life, not for this stage, but for the right silence. "When I was a little girl," she began, her voice soft but steady, "my grandmother told me to always enter a room with your back straight and your head high, even if the world insists you crawl." A pause, stillness. She said, "They may call you many things, but what matters most is what you answer to." I never forgot that. Somewhere near the center, a woman leaned forward, her eyes glassy. A man who'd been checking his watch earlier now stared, completely still. "I came here tonight because someone thought it would be funny," she continued, her tone without bitterness, "to invite the woman who cleans their holes to this gala of gold. I accepted not out of pride, not out of spite, but because when someone hands you a door, even sarcastically, you decide whether you'll walk through it or walk away." Murmurs ran like whispers across silk. You saw me tonight and wondered who I was. You wondered who made my dress, who styled my hair, how I walked like I'd done this before. You assumed I was born in another world. She smiled slightly, not mocking, just knowing. But I was born in this world, yours, once. The room tensed. Years ago, I stood on stages like this. I signed contracts, led teams, shook hands, with names you all know. I founded a company that grew too fast and trusted people who spoke in suits, but lied in silence. And when it all crumbled, I lost everything except myself. Silence. I applied to dozens of places. No one wanted the woman whose company fell. So I picked up a broom. Not out of shame, but because standing still wasn't an option. Work is work. Dignity doesn't wear titles. A gasp barely audible came from one of the side tables. Someone recognized her story now. A journalist mouthed a name silently, eyes wide. She kept going. I've been cleaning these floors for 2 years, every day. I watched you pass me by. Some of you never looked up. Some of you nodded. Politely, some didn't even notice. But I noticed everything. Another pause. The weight of truth pressed the room into stillness. I watched you value presence over purpose. I watched power reduced to performance. And yet, I never stopped walking tall. Because I know who I am. And I know what I am not. Now, the crowd hung on every syllable. I am not your joke. I am not your entertainment. I am not a mistake who wandered in through the wrong door. I am a woman who rebuilt herself, who showed up, who chose silence until silence needed breaking. The billionaire stood near the edge of the stage, motionless. His mouth was slightly open, but no sound came. His grip on the glass in his hand had tightened. He looked as though he'd just been handed a mirror and didn't like the reflection. She turned slightly, meeting his gaze just briefly. Not a glare, not vengeance. Just the calm assertion of someone who had grown past him. I didn't come tonight to impress you, she said. I came to remind myself that I still could. Then she stepped back from the mic. For a moment, no one moved. The silence didn't feel awkward, it felt sacred. Then it came. The applause. It didn't erupt, it rose, like something inevitable, something earned. From the back corners to the front row, hands clapped with growing force, not out of politeness, not out of obligation, but because what they had just witnessed was not a speech. It was a revelation. She stepped down from the stage slowly, nodding to the MC, who looked completely disarmed, unsure how to follow that moment. The applause only grew. Guests stood. A standing ovation in a room where standing was often considered beneath them. They stood for her. The billionaire, for the first time that night, was no longer seen. People looked past him, around him. Some walked away from his circle. Others whispered, shaking their heads. The spotlight had moved and it wasn't coming back. She returned to her place in the crowd as gracefully as she had entered. But she no longer needed to say another word. The room would carry her voice long after she left. And in the hush beneath the applause, something fundamental had shifted. They had come to celebrate wealth, but they had witnessed worth. The gala ended with her words still echoing in the air. As the final notes of music faded and the guests slowly spilled out into the night, she walked toward the exit with the same quiet grace she had arrived with. No rush, no theatrics, just dignity in motion. The red carpet felt different now. Not something she was stepping onto for the first time, but something that had been beneath her all along, only waiting for the world to notice. Her posture didn't change. Her expression remained composed, but the energy around her pulsed with a newfound electricity. People parted for her like waves around a stone, not out of fear, but respect. Reporters rushed forward, voices rising over one another, questions about her past, her message, her future. Microphones extended, cameras rolling, a few even called her madam, unsure how else to address the woman who had just turned a gala on its head without raising her voice. She paused only briefly, offering no sound bites, no dramatic quotes, just a small, composed smile and a look that said everything. She hadn't come for attention. She hadn't come to perform. She had come to remind them of something they'd forgotten. Some guests followed her out, not out of obligation, but a kind of stunned admiration. One woman asked for a photo. A man in a navy suit offered his business card. Calling her a disruptor, a tech executive stepped forward with an offer to fund anything she wanted to build. But she declined them all with quiet finality. Not rudely, not arrogantly, just sincerely. Her mission wasn't to collect favors, it was to spark memory, to shift perception. She had already received what she came for, the return of her own narrative. By the time she reached the curb, the driver had already opened the door to her car, a modest but sleek vehicle that belonged to no one else but her. She slipped inside, closing the door with the soft finality of someone who didn't need to announce her exit. Behind her, the cameras kept flashing, but the moment was already complete. She didn't need applause. She'd already reclaimed something more valuable: her voice, her presence, herself. The next morning, the office building she cleaned felt altered. Not physically. The floors were still spotless. The elevator still hummed, the same coffee machine whirred in the corner. But the people moved differently. Heads turned when she walked by. Conversations paused. Eyes flicked up from desks, and for the first time in years, silence followed her, not as an afterthought, but as a sign of reverence. Colleagues who once rushed past her now made space for her in hallways. Security guards nodded with respect. Even the receptionist, who once barely glanced her way, gave a cautious, almost embarrassed smile. She returned to work with no change in uniform, no change in task. She still carried her supplies, still moved from floor to floor, but the perception was no longer cloaked in invisibility. They had seen her now, not the uniform, but the woman, not her job, but her power. And it unsettled them in ways they hadn't yet begun to understand. The billionaire didn't speak to her immediately. For hours, he stayed hidden behind frosted glass and silence. But eventually, he emerged. He walked toward her slowly, no longer with the confidence of a man who owned the building, but with the stiffness of someone who'd realized he wasn't in control of the room anymore. He approached her in the lobby, awkward, unsure. "I didn't mean to." I thought it would be funny, he mumbled, eyes darting around. She looked up at him, the same way she had when he handed her the invitation. Calm, silent. There was no fire in her gaze, no forgiveness either, just neutrality, a deep, patient stillness. She didn't say a word, just gave a slight nod. It was not an acceptance of apology. It was an acknowledgement of his discomfort and nothing more. He seemed to wait for something, words, emotion, perhaps a way to relieve himself of the weight. But she offered none. She turned and walked away, not rudely, just completely. His apology floated in the air, unanswered, like a leaf tossed into still water. And she returned to her work, reclaiming her space not with noise, but with presence. Weeks passed. Then, quietly, without fanfare, she resigned. No farewell party, no speeches. She handed in her badge with a thank you note that simply read, "This was never the end." Most didn't even realize she'd gone until they noticed the floors weren't quite as spotless, the windows not quite as gleaming. A few whispered about her exit, speculating, but no one really knew. She had always moved in silence, and now she left in it too. Months later, the world knew. A news article began to circulate online. At first, just a small feature from a local business outlet. Then it spread first on social media, then on national platforms. The headline read, "Once a janitor, now a CEO, the quiet rebirth of a powerhouse." It included a photo of her not at a gala, not in uniform, but standing in front of a modern glass building with her name etched across the door. The story detailed how, after the gala, she quietly reconnected with a few former allies, received funding offers from guests who had seen her speak, and rebuilt what she once lost. A new company, a new mission, a new legacy. The article quoted a few lines from her speech. It mentioned the billionaire, though not by name, only as a high-profile host whose failed joke sparked a powerful moment. It mentioned how thousands had shared her story, young women, single mothers. Former executives turned invisible workers all wrote messages of how her story had awakened. Something in them, a reminder that worth never dies. It only waits. Photos surfaced of her in boardrooms. Again, not as a guest, but as the one making the decisions. She wasn't chasing revenge. She was building something better, something lasting. And then, the final image. Her walking through the front doors of her company, dressed in a tailored navy suit, head held high, not for show, not for applause, but because that's how she always walked, past the reception desk, past the lobby, past the glass reflections that no longer saw her as a shadow. She moved like someone who had been erased, rewritten herself, and returned holding the pen. No brooms now. No silence required. She was home.